Disney's working on another live-action version of Snow White. I know. Disney and their live-action remakes. You've probably heard the complaints about Disney and its princesses. They're damsels in distress who just are waiting to be saved by a man. Reading about the new live-action version, I saw a quote that they're making Snow White to where she isn't dreaming of true love and she won't be saved by the prince. That got me thinking of the original story that it's based on, Little Snow White by the brothers Grimm. That story's been revised several times, but I'm going to focus on the original that was published in 1812. It starts out with a queen sewing and looking out the window bordered by ebony. She's admiring the falling snow. Since she's paying more attention to the snow and not the sewing, she pricks her finger. Somehow, 3 drops of blood fall onto the snow, and she thought the red on the snow was pretty, so she thought it would be great to have a daughter, quote, as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood in the window frame, end quote. And wouldn't you know it, she does have a daughter whose skin is white as snow, cheeks as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. Lacking imagination, they name her Snow White. Darn it though, Mommy died right after she was born and isn't able to see little Snow White grow up. After a year, her dad, the king, married another, and now Snow White has a stepmother. For the next 6 years, the stepmother seemed only to care about her beauty. Like the Disney queen, she knows she's the most beautiful woman in the kingdom because her magical mirror tells her all the time. Around the time Snow White turns 7, evil stepmommy asks the mirror to stroke her ego. But this time the mirror tells her that she isn't as beautiful as Snow White. Really? Should the mirror be looking at Snow White this way when she's only 7? Evil stepmommy is shocked.
How dare you!
She's envious of this little girl. Her pride makes it impossible for her to let this transgression go unpunished. So she summons her huntsman and orders him to take Snow White into the woods and kill her. To top off this terrible act, she wants Snow White's lung and liver as a token. Of course, the huntsman is unable to carry out this act, although more because of cowardice than benevolence. He thought if he left her there, some beast would eat her. And then he killed a young bear and gave the queen the lung and liver of that bear, to which the queen had them cooked and she ate them. Wow. Little Snow White is frightened and goes running off crying. Those mean beasts the hunter was hoping would do his job for him, just let her run by them. Eventually she came upon a cottage. It was small, but it was neat and clean. In the cottage, she found a table that was set for 7. There were also 7 little beds that were stood up against the wall. Even though this is clearly someone else's home, she's hungry and thirsty, so she decides to eat a little bit of the vegetables and bread from each plate and drink a drop from each mug. She thought that was better than eating and drinking from a single plate. Sure. After eating such a great meal, she was tired, so she checked out each bed. Some were too short, some were too long. One was just right. So she laid down and quickly fell asleep. The cottage owners came home late in the evening from a long day of digging ore in the mountains. Immediately, they could tell someone has been there as things are out of place. Then they noticed someone ate their food. Someone sat in their chair. Someone was lying in their bed. Wait, what story am I talking about? Oh, yeah. The dwarves, who do not have names, see Snow White sleeping and decide to not wake her. Whichever dwarf's bed she was sleeping in wound up taking turns sleeping with the other dwarves during the night. In the morning, she told them about Evil Queenie's plans for her. In the Disney version, she offers to keep house for them, but in the Grimm version, they tell her that if she keeps house for them, then she can stay with them and she will want for nothing. Snow White agrees to this. Every day the dwarves went off to the mine and she cooked and cleaned. The dwarves tell her that the queen is dangerous and could find out where she is, so she should never leave the house and never let anyone come in. You're probably wondering why she would agree to do housework for the dwarves. After all, she's a princess. Doing these menial tasks for the dwarves prepares her for how to take care of herself when she's an adult. It also helps keep her humble and keep her grounded. Now, the dwarves became an issue in the new live-action version, but I think the Grimms probably used dwarves because in a lot of literature and folklore, they're considered to be truth-tellers, and they played a role of helpers to royal characters, providing them with guidance and assistance. Since Snow White's been cast out of the kingdom, she needs someone to help her learn to survive and give her good advice. Why not make these people dwarves then? At the time the story would have been told, they would have been recognized for these characteristics. In the meantime, the queen, having eaten a lung and liver with a little salt that she thought was Snow White's, believed she is now the most beautiful of all, but the mirror had different ideas. She decided to take care of this herself. We have the expression, if you want something done right, do it yourself for a reason, right? So she disguises herself and sells ribbons and laces to Snow White. She wrapped a lace around Snow White so tightly that Snow White passed out. Queenie ran off thinking she was successful. The dwarves came home and cut the laces off, and Snow White revived. They then reminded her that the queen is sneaky and she needs to be more diligent. Queenie finds out that she's failed. Angry, she tries again. She goes to Snow White and gives her a poison comb. She's disguised differently this time. Disguised Queenie offers to comb Snow White's hair, and as soon as the comb hits the hair, she falls dead. Queenie is happy with herself and goes home. The dwarves come home and is horrified to find Snow White seeming to be dead. They find the comb and they remove it, and somehow Snow White's revived again. They once again admonish her about the queen. Evil stepmommy finds that she has failed yet again. Now, she is absolutely determined to kill Snow White. She poisons an apple, but only on one side. She goes to Snow White. Though Snow White is wary of this woman selling the apple looks really good and tasty. Disguised stepmommy assures her that the apple is okay, and to prove it, she takes a little bite of it. I guess she expected this was going to happen, so that's why she only poisoned one side. But how did she know which side was poisoned? And also, now that she's taken a bite, would Snow White even want the apple anymore? But of course, this fools Snow White, and she bites from the other side of the apple. She immediately drops to the ground dead. Queenie is very pleased with herself now. She thinks she's finally killed Snow White. She ran back and had the mirror confirm that she is now the most beautiful in the land. I guess third time's a charm. The dwarves come home and probably thought that this is one of those other times where they find her dead, but then they find out that she's not. So they pick her up, but she doesn't regain consciousness. So they cut off the laces, and she still doesn't regain consciousness. They comb her hair looking for a comb. They wash her with water and wine, but to no avail. They are shocked and saddened to find that Snow White really is dead this time. They put her on a briar and sat and cried over her for 3 days. You might notice that this is the third time the number 3 has shown up. 3 drops of blood, 3 attempts at murder, 3 days of mourning. 3 is an important number in literature, philosophy, and religion. In oral traditions, 3 things are easy to remember, and they're also used to help with persuasion. Now back to the story. Since she still looked alive, just sleeping, the dwarves couldn't bring themselves to bury her, so they put her in a glass coffin and wrote her name on the mountain. And one of them stayed with her always. Just a thought, if someone could stay with her in death, couldn't they have done the same when she was alive to protect her from Queenie? I think the Grimms felt Snow White had to learn a couple of lessons from Queenie, so the dwarves had to not be as diligent in protection of her when she was alive. She had to learn that she shouldn't be so trusting. She also had to learn that it's okay to want to be pretty and okay to use things like ribbons and combs to help make you pretty, but you can't make it your whole life. It can become a dangerous obsession. Once she's dead, though, she's completely helpless and therefore needs extra protection. Anyway, animals come to visit her and she stays there for a long, long time. But she never changes and she still looks like she's just sleeping. One day, a prince came and offered to buy the coffin. The dwarves refused. The prince tells them he cannot live without seeing her all the time. Ew. He promised to honor and prize her as his dearest possession. Possession? Really? Somehow, his words moved the dwarves, and so they let him have Snow White. The prince had his men carry the coffin. One of them stumbled on a tree stump, causing Snow White to jostle just enough for the poisoned piece of apple she had bitten to fall out of her mouth. Wait, with all that the dwarves did to try to wake her, none of that made the bite fall out? How? Okay, so now Snow White wakes up and asks, where is she? The prince says, you're with me. I love you. Let's get married. And she said, okay. Queenie continued living blissfully happy until one day the mirror told her she wasn't as pretty as the young queen. What? Evil stepmommy must know what is going on. So she went to the wedding. Wait, the mirror called the woman young queen, but if she isn't married yet, how is she a queen? Anyway, Queenie goes there and finds that it is Snow White. She's frozen in anger and fear. Somehow a pair of iron slippers had been sitting in a fire, and they were brought to her, and she was forced to put them on and dance in them until she died. Things to note: the number 7 is used 3 times. 7-year-old Snow White. In some versions, she's taken 7 mountains away from the castle, and 7 dwarves. Like the number 3, 7 is an important number as it represents completing a cycle, like 7 days of the week. In this case, it probably has to do with Snow White moving from being a child before death to becoming a mature person after death. Also, she never dreams of falling in love. And technically, the prince does save her, but his purpose of the story is really just to speed up her recovery from the poisoned apple. It could have been anybody. But a prince is just icing on the cake for the ending, right? Snow White, who is humble, can be okay wherever her circumstances take her. And she's loved by everyone. And she gets to marry for love. Whereas Queenie was vain and always was in fear of losing people's interest when she lost her beauty.